The first shell fell at 02:14 in the morning, and the ancient stones of Monte Cassino shuddered, as if they still remembered every century of their existence. Men said the monastery had survived 1,500 years of storms, invasions, earthquakes, saints, and heretics. But that night it felt like the mountain itself finally exhaled in pain. Fire rolled across the ridge like a second sunrise, sickly red, devouring frescoes, beams, walls, and whatever prayers still clung to the ruins. Private Anthony Carver lay flat in a shallow crater, radio pressed to his ear, trying not to think about the fact that the Order of St. Benedict had never intended their monastery to withstand modern artillery. Static hissed, but buried beneath it he kept catching something else, a long, low-frequency vibration that made his teeth ache. Almost like a human voice stretched beyond its natural limit. He tapped the headphones, thinking they were malfunctioning. They weren't. "Carver, you picking up anything?" Lieutenant Moore shouted, over the thunder of another barrage. Carver hesitated. "Sir, I'm getting a reading, but it's underground, like it's coming from beneath the ridge." Moore didn't answer, not because he didn't hear him, but because the mountain itself roared. A column of smoke spiraled upward, split by flashes of burning timber and shattered stone. Then, through drifting ash, Carver saw movement. Not soldiers, not refugees, a single figure. He stood at the edge of the broken terrace, a man in a long, dark habit, still as a statue, not ducking, not flinching, not reacting to the fire curling dangerously close to the hem of his robes. The blast waves whipped his garment like a flag, but he did not move. Carver blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the figure was staring directly toward the American lines, not waving for help, not praying, just watching. Another explosion lit the sky. For a fraction of a second, the flames illuminated the monk's face. But Carver saw nothing. No nose, no eyes, no mouth. Just shadow under a hood, empty but aware. "Lieutenant," Carver began, but the words died in his throat. The figure had vanished. Not walked away, not fallen. Simply wasn't there anymore. Carver yanked the headphones back on. The vibration was louder now, clearer, layered, like many voices blending into one. Moore crouched beside him. "Report." "It's not interference," Carver whispered. "Sir, this is coming from the tunnels." "What tunnels?" Carver didn't know. But whatever was beneath Monte Cassino was awake. The ground trembled again, not from a shell this time. A deep, unnatural pulse rolled through the soil, the kind you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears. Carver's radio crackled violently. The long drone snapped into fragments that almost resembled words. A language he didn't speak. A language that sounded like warning. Moore grabbed his shoulder. "We move on my mark. The ridge is opening up." He meant it figuratively. But Carver wasn't so sure. He risked one more glance at the ruined terrace. There was no monk, but the stones where he'd stood had cracked in a perfect semicircle, as though something beneath had pushed upward for the first time in centuries. Carver swallowed hard. "Lieutenant, I don't think we're alone up there." Moore laughed dryly, wiping ash from his cheek. "Kid, this is war. No one is alone." Carver almost said it. Not that kind of alone. But another shiver rippled through the ground, silencing him. This one colder, deeper, like the mountain was breathing. And for the first time that night, he had the overwhelming sensation that Monte Cassino wasn't just a battlefield. It was a threshold. And something on the other side had finally decided to look back. By dawn, the monastery lay in a plume of smoke that bled into the clouds. The slopes of Monte Cassino were littered with rubble and scorched olive trees, and the cold February wind carried the distinct metallic scent of pulverized stone. The monks who had lived here for generations had been evacuated weeks earlier. What remained now was an empty skeleton of sanctity, bones of a holy place scattered across a mountain built for war. But even stripped of its walls, Monte Cassino still looked inhabited. Carver tried to focus on routine. Routine kept men from thinking too much, from noticing the wrong things, the impossible things, and he wanted badly to forget the figure he'd seen in the night. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw that same still silhouette framed by fire, that empty hood looking straight through him. He joined the squad, moving toward what used to be the eastern cloister, or rather, what remained of it: collapsed arches, fractured pillars, a carpet of tumbled stone. Under one of the slabs, a faint current of cold air escaped, as though the mountain was exhaling. "That's our entry point," Lieutenant Moore said. "Engineers think it leads into the lower storage chambers. Could be intact corridors. Could be traps. Could be nothing." "Could be hell," one soldier muttered. No one disagreed. The descent wasn't easy. They had to clear broken masonry and twist their bodies through a jagged opening barely wide enough for a man. But once inside, the air changed immediately. It was still dusty, still thick with smoke, yet somehow colder, older, as if they had stepped into a pocket of time untouched by the destruction above. Carver swept his flashlight across the stone hall. The ceiling curved into a barrel vault, darkened by centuries of candle smoke. The walls were carved with Roman numerals, faint crosses, and other marks too worn to decipher. But it wasn't the carvings that made Carver's stomach tighten. It was the silence. Not normal silence, but the kind that feels intentional, heavy, listening. Moore motioned them forward. "We clear the perimeter, then map the structure. The Benedictines built these into the mountain centuries ago. Expect multiple levels." Carver nodded, but the words barely registered. He kept thinking about the recording in his headset. That vibration. Those layered voices he could almost, but not quite understand. He had told no one about the part that frightened him the most. The moment it had shifted pitch, forming something close to human speech. He didn't want to hear it again. But as they advanced deeper, his radio crackled to life. A whisper of static, a pulse. Then, a low hum rolling under the floor, vibrating through his boots. "Carver," Moore snapped. "You hearing interference again?" He swallowed. "Yes, sir. Same frequency. It's stronger down here." "Great." Moore exhaled sharply. "Either Krauts are tunneling under us, or your set's possessed." Carver didn't laugh. They reached an intersection where the hall split into 3 tunnels. All narrow, all unlit, all leading into unknown depth. Moore signaled Carver to the left, Reyes to the right, and took the center path himself. Carver sighed, checked his ammunition, and stepped forward. The moment he entered the left corridor, he felt it. A shift in the air pressure. Not like descending into a cave. More like walking into a room where someone had just been standing, their presence still clinging to the space. The walls down here were smoother, older, the carvings more Latin than Christian, more structured than devotional. Lines, symbols, marks resembling early Roman engineering codes, and something else layered on top, sigils that didn't fit any architectural purpose. He crouched to examine an unfamiliar glyph etched beside the floor, a crescent intersecting with 2 straight lines, almost like a boundary sign. A warning. His radio hissed again, but this time it wasn't static. It was footsteps, slow, bare, echoing. Carver froze. No one from his squad was in this corridor. He was alone. The footsteps grew louder, coming from deep in the darkness ahead. Measured, intentional, not hurried, not frightened. As though whoever, whatever what was approaching, had all the time in the world. Carver raised his flashlight, and the beam sliced through dust-filled air. A shape appeared, tall, thin, hooded, the same figure from the night before, now standing at the far end of the tunnel. The light hit the folds of his robe but refused to define the face under the hood. The shadows stayed absolute, as if deliberately resisting illumination. The monk lifted one arm, palm outward, not beckoning, not threatening, stopping. "Sir," Carver whispered into the radio, voice trembling, "I have visual contact with something, human-shaped, possibly a monk or—" But before he could finish, the figure dropped his hand and turned slightly to the side, as though listening. Then his head tilted toward Carver in a single, unnatural motion that looked too precise to be flesh and bone. And then a whisper, soft, breathless, but unmistakable. "Non in trait, do not enter." Carver stepped back instinctively, stumbling over loose stone. The figure flickered, not moved, not walked, but flickered, like a candle caught in a sudden draft. He blinked once, gone. All that remained was the hum beneath the floor, now throbbing like a heartbeat. And Carver realized the sound wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the mountain itself. Moore's voice burst through the headset. "Carver, report!" "There was a man," Carver said hoarsely. "A monk. He warned me. Sir, there's someone down here." Moore's answer was immediate and hard. "There hasn't been a monk in this monastery since January. They were all evacuated. Whatever you saw—" But Carver cut him off. "No, sir. Whatever I saw isn't from the evacuation." The hum deepened. Dust drifted from the ceiling as though the tunnels had inhaled. And then, far ahead, something heavy shifted in the dark. Something too large to be human. Carver's skin went cold, because now he understood. The monk wasn't warning him away from himself. He was warning him away from something else, something deeper, something waking. Lieutenant Moore did not believe in ghosts, monks, or anything that didn't carry a rifle and obey gravity. Yet even he hesitated when he reached the place where Carver had seen the hooded figure. The air was wrong, colder than the surrounding tunnels, almost damp, as though a river flowed somewhere close beneath the stone. Moore swept his flashlight across the walls. "No footprints, no drag marks, nothing. Whoever he was, he didn't walk out of here." Carver swallowed hard. "He didn't walk, sir." Moore shot him a look, sharp, irritated, but with something nervous beneath it. "Don't start with that." But Carver wasn't starting anything. Something else was. A tremor rippled through the floor, a subtle shift, like the settling of old foundations, except this felt purposeful. Like something on the other side of the stone had shifted its weight. Reyes jogged toward them from the right corridor, looking unsettled. "Sir, you need to see this." They followed him to the junction where the three tunnels met. Reyes pointed to the ground. There were markings there. Not carved, not etched, burned. A thin crescent shape intersected by two straight lines, identical to the symbol Carver had seen earlier, burned into the limestone floor, as if by extreme heat. Yet the stone around it was cool. Moore crouched and touched it carefully. "This wasn't done by explosives." "No, sir," Reyes agreed. "This wasn't done today." Carver's radio crackled again, though he hadn't touched it. A pulse, a hiss, a whisper that didn't form words, only the suggestion of breath. Reyes stepped back. "Whatever's down here, it doesn't want us going deeper." Moore straightened. "Our orders say otherwise. The Germans could be using these tunnels." "We keep moving." Reyes didn't argue, but Carver noticed the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. The deeper they went, the more the tunnel changed. The Benedictine stonework gave way to something older, unpolished limestone walls that curved impossibly, not following any architectural logic. Shadows, pooled in the corners, where no shadows should fall. The air felt dense, thick enough to taste. And then they reached the archway. It rose from the tunnel floor like the jawbone of some enormous beast. Roman masonry fused into natural cavern rock, with relief images worn by centuries. A line of Latin ran along the curve. Non transiere. Do not cross. Moore exhaled sharply. Well, that's subtle, Reyes whispered. Sir, I don't think this is... But the whisper died, drowned by a sudden bang from deeper inside the archway. The echo rolled back toward them like a living thing, shaking dust from the ceiling. That sounded like a door, Carver murmured. Reyes took a step behind him. Doors don't close themselves. They did not want to enter. Every instinct screamed not to. Even Moore hesitated as he raised his flashlight toward the black void beyond the arch. And that's when they heard it, a voice, faint, male, ragged. Help! Help me! Moore lowered his gun slightly. That's an American voice, one of ours. But Carver felt his stomach twist. Sir, that doesn't sound right. The voice came again, louder this time but distorted, like someone imitating human speech without fully understanding how words fit together. Help. Me. Please. They exchanged glances. Could be a wounded engineer, Reyes suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Echo Team was supposed to survey this level. Moore made up his mind. We check it out. Weapons ready. Stay behind me. He stepped through the archway. For a moment, nothing happened. No blast. No trap. Just the same cold, stale air. Then Carver followed. The corridor beyond was narrower, the ceiling lower. The walls bore more of the burned symbols, some overlapping, some half-faded. The rock underfoot sloped downward, the incline unnatural for Roman construction. The darkness felt thicker, like a physical weight pressing in on their shoulders. The voice moaned again. Help! I'm... down here! Reyes leaned closer to Carver. He's repeating exactly the same phrase, same tone, same rhythm. Carver swallowed. Like it's not a man. Like it's playing a recording. Another sound echoed from the dark. A scrape. A slow, dragging scrape. Metal on stone. Moore raised his weapon. Identify yourself. This is the U.S. Fifth Army. Silence. Then, Tunan Debes. You must not... Carver felt the words press against his ribs like cold fingers. That's not English, Reyes whispered. Who the hell? But then, they saw it. Just at the edge of their flashlight beams. A shape crawling toward them. Bent. Twisted. Human-shaped but wrong. Limbs too long. Joints at unnatural angles. Dragging itself with jerking motions as if puppeteered by invisible hands. Moore shouted, Back! Move back now! But Carver couldn't move. His mind froze, because the crawling figure was wearing an American uniform, torn, burned, covered in dust. The dog tags still clung to its neck, twisted and blackened. Carver forced air into his lungs. Reyes. That's one of the missing engineers. The thing lifted its head. Its eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused, but its mouth moved in a slow, mechanical way, pulling the same phrase out of a broken throat. Help! Me! Please! Moore opened fire. The tunnel filled with gunshots, explosions of dust, fragments of bone and stone. The figure jerked violently and collapsed, limbs folding beneath it like wet cloth. For one heartbeat, silence returned. Then, the mountain answered. A deep, resonant boom, not from ahead but from below, shook the tunnel so violently that the walls seemed to breathe inward. Dust poured from the ceiling. A low, echoing moan rolled through the ground, as though the entire mountain had begun to wake. Reyes grabbed Carver's arm. We need to get out, now! But Carver didn't move, because standing at the far end of the corridor, illuminated for a single, horrifying moment by their flashlight glare, was the monk. Tall, still, hooded, his arm lifted again, palm forward, stopping them, protecting them, or warning them. Carver's voice trembled. Sir. Moore slowly lowered his weapon. The monk inclined his head, a gesture both ancient and sorrowful. And then he faded into the darkness, dissolving like smoke. The tunnel shuddered, and from the depths below, something enormous began to rise. The tremor did not stop. It rolled through the stone like a pulse, steady, rhythmic, alive. The very floor beneath their boots felt warm for a moment, then cold again, as though something massive was shifting its weight deep under the mountain. Dust clouds billowed along the corridor, and loose fragments of limestone clattered down like brittle teeth shaken from an ancient jaw. Moore grabbed Reyes by the collar and yanked him back toward the archway. "Fall back! Carver, move!" They stumbled through the narrow passage, the incline now working against them, as the tunnel quaked like the spine of some awakening beast. Carver tried not to look behind him, but the instinct to check for pursuit was overwhelming. He risked a glance. The crawling figure, the broken thing wearing an American uniform, had not moved. It lay twisted on the floor, eyes open, staring. But Carver noticed something that made bile rise in his throat. It wasn't staring at them. It was staring at the archway, as though afraid of what was coming from below. They pushed past the threshold, and the air changed, instantly. The tremor weakened, muffled by the ancient masonry. The burned symbols, the Latin warnings carved into stone, all of them seemed to exist for one purpose: to hold something back, to bind it, to keep it asleep. But something had disturbed it now. "Seal the corridor!" Moore shouted. "Reyes! Charges!" Reyes slammed his pack to the ground, hands trembling as he fumbled with the detonators. "Sir, with all respect, if we blow this wrong, the whole damn level could collapse." "That's the idea," Moore growled. Carver didn't argue. He felt the tremors growing again. Whatever lay beyond that arch wasn't crawling. It wasn't limping. It was approaching with the slow, heavy confidence of a creature accustomed to darkness and pressure and time. Reyes primed the explosives. Moore shouted, "3, 2." A sudden gust of freezing air swept through the hallway. Reyes froze. Carver did too, because standing between them and the archway, exactly where the tunnel began to plunge downward, was the monk. Unmoving, impossible, silent. He stood with his back to them this time, facing the darkness beyond the arch, facing the place the engineers had tried to enter, the place that had taken them. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared, as though bracing against an unseen force. Dust swirled around him in frantic eddies. The hood over his head lifted slightly in the wind, revealing nothing. Just blackness, a void deeper than shadow, the absence of a face. Carver whispered, "Sir." "He's trying to hold it back." Moore didn't answer. No one moved. The monk lifted both arms now, palms facing the archway, in a gesture that was not a greeting, not a blessing, a barrier, a command. The ground roared. Something struck the stone from below. A single violent impact that sent a crack snaking up the archway's frame, splitting Latin words and burned sigils alike. The monk flinched but did not fall. His robes billowed outward like sails in a storm. Reyes gasped, "Holy God!" The impact came again, harder. The crack widened. Dust poured from the ceiling like sand through the fingers of a clenched fist. The monk stepped forward, just one step, and the tremor stopped instantly. Silence fell so sharply it hurt. Carver could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. Reyes was hyperventilating. Moore was gripping his rifle so tightly his knuckles were white. Then, a whisper. Not from the monk, not from the mountain, from everywhere at once. "Non transiere." The same words carved into the arch. "Do not cross. Do not enter. Do not wake it." The monk turned his head slightly, as though listening to something only he could hear, and raised his left arm higher. The shadows beneath his hood deepened, pulling inward as if devouring the faint light that dared to touch him. The ground vibrated again, but this time the tremor felt like a groan of frustration, as though something denied its hunger. The monk stepped closer to the arch. His hands pressed outward until his palms lay flat against the invisible boundary. A faint glow flickered where his skin, or whatever lay beneath his robes, met the air. A seal, a ward, a sacrifice. Carver's voice cracked. "Sir, we can't leave him there." Moore didn't take his eyes off the figure. "He isn't here for us." Another thunderous impact struck from below, the worst yet, and the archway burst open with a shriek of breaking stone. Dust exploded outward, blinding them. But when it cleared, the monk was gone. The tremors stopped. The air grew still. The corridor beyond the arch was filled with collapsed masonry, impassable, sealed by the mountain itself. Reyes wiped dust from his eyes. Did he do that?" Moore exhaled shakily. "I don't know what the hell he did. But we're leaving. Now." Carver lingered, staring at the fractured archway. The monk had vanished without a trace, but something about the final tremor felt deliberate. Not a failure of the structure, a choice, a trade, a punishment. He whispered, almost to himself, "Sir, I think he was holding something back down there for centuries." Moore grimaced. "Then let's not be the idiots who let it out." They turned to leave the tunnels. But as Carver followed the others, he glanced at his radio. The same radio that had been picking up the strange low-frequency hum since the night before. The signal was gone. Silence. Then, during the last step out of the underground chamber, a faint, barely audible whisper crackled through the static. "Back. Not done." Carver froze. The voice was not the monk's, and it wasn't human. They returned to the surface just after noon, faces gray with dust and shock. Sunlight pierced the lingering smoke over Monte Cassino, but to Carver, it looked wrong. Too bright, too clean for a mountain that had just groaned under the weight of something ancient. Reinforcements spotted them emerging from the ruined cloister. "Jesus, you look like you crawled out of a grave," one of the sergeants muttered as they passed. No one replied. Moore ordered immediate debriefing. A medical officer checked their vitals. Pulse elevated, pupils reactive, lungs clear. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that explained why Carver's hands wouldn't stop trembling, or why Reyes kept glancing over his shoulder at shadows that weren't there. 4 other soldiers escorted them to a temporary command shelter, built from torn canvas and stacked ammo crates. Inside, the air was warm from field heaters, and the smell of cigarette smoke hung heavy. Behind a makeshift desk sat Colonel Hendricks, a man carved from equal parts steel and suspicion. He did not bother with pleasantries. "Lieutenant Moore," Hendricks began, "your report says you encountered what appeared to be one of our missing engineers, alive." Moore stiffened. "We encountered something wearing Echo Team's uniform." Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "Something." Moore hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough for Hendricks's eyes to sharpen. Carver felt the weight of the colonel's stare move to him next. "You were monitoring frequencies during the operation, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Then perhaps you can explain why we picked up anomalous interference at the exact moment you entered the lower levels." Carver swallowed. "Sir, I don't think it was interference." "Then what was it?" Carver searched for words that wouldn't make him sound insane. The best he managed was, "Something was broadcasting. Not with equipment, with the ground itself." Hendricks stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Moore exhaled sharply. "Colonel, the monastery sits on a system of tunnels older than any map we've got. Some of it Roman, some pre-Roman, and some—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Should not have been open." Hendricks tapped a pencil against the desk. "Are you telling me the Germans were down there?" Moore exchanged a look with his men. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I'm telling you something else was." Reyes finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Sir, one of the engineers, I don't know how to describe it, he wasn't alive. But he wasn't dead either." Hendricks slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You all inhaled smoke, you're exhausted, you're seeing shapes in the dark. There was a monk, Carver interrupted before he could stop himself. Hendricks stared at him, baffled. What? A monk, Carver repeated. Hooded, tall. He was down there with us. In the tunnels? Yes, sir. He spoke to you? Yes, sir. What language? Latin. Hendricks blinked twice, slowly. And what did this imaginary monk say? Carver lowered his gaze. The same thing carved into the archway. Non-transier. Hendricks leaned back, studying them. There was no mockery in his eyes now, only calculation. Finally, he said, You're all confined to base for medical observation. No contact with other units. No discussion of this event outside cleared personnel. Moore stepped forward. Sir, with respect, dismissed, Hendricks snapped. That is an order. They filed out one by one, the weight of the colonel's gaze heavy on their backs. Outside, the mountain wind cut through their uniforms. The monastery ruins loomed above them like a broken crown. Reyes muttered, We're being silenced. Moore didn't deny it. Command thinks we're rattled. Carver stared up at the shattered silhouette of Monte Cassino. Command didn't hear the last transmission. Reyes looked at him sharply. What last transmission? Carver hesitated, the words still cold in his memory. Back. Not done. He hadn't wanted to believe it. Even now, he wished he hadn't heard it. But he had, before he could. Answer. A runner sprinted toward them from the communications tent. Lieutenant Moore! The kid shouted, breathless. Sir, you need to come see this, right now. What is it? The runner swallowed hard. It's Echo Team, sir. Something's wrong with their locator beacons. Moore frowned. Wrong how? The runner's voice dropped to a near whisper. They're moving. The three men froze. Carver felt ice crawl up his spine. He forced the words out. Moving where? The runner stepped back, eyes wide with fear. Upward, he said. From deep under the mountain, Moore clenched his jaw. Toward the surface. Yes, sir. Fast. Carver's heartbeat doubled. Not echo signals. Not ghosts. Not hallucinations. Something was climbing. Reyes whispered, Sir, maybe the monk didn't seal the tunnels. Maybe he only bought us time. But Carver knew the truth before anyone spoke it aloud. The mountain hadn't quieted. It had only inhaled. And now, it was breathing out. By the time they reached the communications tent, the air inside was so tense, it felt electrically charged. Operators hovered over equipment, pale-faced, whispering urgently. A map of Monte Cassino was spread across a crate table, covered in grease marks and hastily drawn contour lines. Sergeant Hollis looked up as Moore entered. Sir, this started 10 minutes ago. First one beacon, then 3. Now all 7. Show me, Moore said. Hollis swallowed and flicked a switch. A series of faint blips glowed on the radar-like scanner. They weren't strong. Nothing like normal radio pings. But they were there, moving in pulsing, irregular increments. Hendricks stormed into the tent. Lieutenant Moore, what the hell am I looking at? Hollis answered quietly. Sir, those are Echo Team's transponders, all active. Hendricks shook his head. Impossible. They've been missing for 36 hours. Yes, sir, Hollis whispered. And now they're climbing toward the monastery. The beacons pulsed again. Higher, faster. Carver felt the same pressure in the air he had felt underground. The faint vibration beneath his feet. The low-frequency hum that didn't belong to radios or machinery. Moore leaned over the scanner. Rate of ascent? Hollis hesitated. Sir, at this speed, they must be crawling, straight up through the rock. Carver's breath caught. Reyes whispered, No one can do that. And Carver said what they were all thinking. No one alive. Hendricks rubbed his forehead. Explain. Now. Moore didn't turn away from the screen. "Sir, the thing we shot in the tunnel, it wasn't alive. But it moved, it spoke. It mimicked an American voice. Maybe it wasn't the only one." The beacons pulsed again, now higher than before. One signal flickered rapidly, as if struggling, then steadied, almost as though something had paused, turned, corrected its direction. Hendricks snapped, "We need ground confirmation. Send scouts to the eastern slope and the monastery wall." "Sir," Moore said carefully, "with respect, if something is coming up from below, scouts aren't going to stop it." "I didn't say stop it," Hendricks growled. "I said identify it. At once." Moore nodded stiffly and ordered 2 units to move. As the tent emptied, Carver remained staring at the map, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The beacons were now only 50 meters from the surface. Reyes whispered, "This is wrong. All of this is wrong." Carver nodded. "They're not escaping. They're following something." Reyes frowned. "Following what?" Carver looked toward the monastery ruins, the shattered walls casting long shadows across the broken courtyard. "The monk," he said quietly, "or whatever the monk was trying to hold back." Reyes didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the beacons pulsed again, now 20 meters from the surface. Then 10. Then a scream cut through the air from outside the tent. Not a soldier, not an animal. Something deeper. A sound that didn't belong in daylight. Moore sprinted outside, Carver and Reyes on his heels. At the top of the rubble slope, near the outer monastery wall, 2 scouts stood frozen, rifles raised. One of them dropped his weapon as Carver approached, hands shaking violently. "Sir! Sir! It's them!" the scout stammered. "Echo Team! We found Echo Team!" Moore frowned. "Where?" The scout pointed to the far corner of the monastery courtyard, where a section of collapsed earth formed a jagged pit, still smoking with disturbed dust. "They just came out," he said, voice cracking. "Straight out of the ground." Carver stepped forward. 7 figures stood there, still, silent, covered head to toe in gray dust and earth. Their uniforms were shredded, burned, caked with soil. Their faces were pale, too pale, their eyes glassy and unfocused. But all 7 stood upright. All 7 breathed shallowly, chests rising and falling in eerie unison. Moore's voice dropped to a whisper. "Echo Team! Identify yourselves!" The figures didn't answer. Not one blinked. Not one flinched. Until the man closest to Carver, the one whose dog tags were half melted, turned his head with a slow, mechanical crack of vertebrae. His lips moved. The voice that came out was wrong, flat, hollow, like a phonograph needle scraping across broken vinyl. "Help! Me!" Carver staggered backward. He had heard that voice before. Not in a tunnel, not in a dream. On his radio, whispering through static hours after the engineer was already dead. Moore raised his weapon. "Stay back." But the 7 figures stepped forward in unison. Not fast, not threatening, just inevitable. The ground vibrated beneath them, just a faint tremor, but unmistakably alive. Reyes whispered, "Sir, they're not coming to us." Moore narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Reyes pointed a trembling finger. The 7 figures weren't advancing on the soldiers. They were walking toward the monastery, toward the shattered entrance to the tunnels, toward the deep place the monk had sealed. Carver's pulse slammed in his ears. "They're going back," he said quietly. "Whatever brought them up wants them returned." Before anyone could react, a gust of freezing air blew across the courtyard. And on the far ridge, just beyond the ruins, Carver saw him. The monk, hooded, motionless, watching, his left hand raised slightly, not stopping this time, not warning, directing, guiding the 7 lost men back into the depths. The earth groaned. The broken ground split further open, and Echo Team descended without protest, disappearing into the dark like children returning to a cradle. The monk lowered his hand. The earth sealed shut, stone folding over itself like soft clay, and the mountain exhaled. Finally, silent. Moore stared, pale as ash. My God, what did we just witness? Carver didn't answer, because in his pocket, his radio crackled again. One last whisper, not from Echo Team, not from the monk, from deeper. Hungry. For the rest of the day, no one went near the place where the earth had sealed itself. Soldiers passed the courtyard in small groups, whispering, crossing themselves, refusing to look directly at the spot. Hendricks ordered a full lockdown around the monastery ruins. No one was allowed within 50 meters of the collapsed ground. He did not offer an explanation. He didn't need to. Every man who had witnessed Echo Team's return and disappearance was already living with the same question clawing at his mind. If the mountain could open and close, what was it? A tunnel? A tomb? A throat? Night fell early. Smoke blackened the horizon. The wind howled across the ridge like a wounded animal. Carver sat alone outside the observation tent, gripping his canteen so tightly it dented. Reyes approached quietly. You're not sleeping. Carver let out a humorless breath. Didn't know it was mandatory. Reyes lowered himself onto an overturned crate. He looked exhausted. Everyone did. It's not your fault, Reyes said. What happened down there? What we saw. None of us could have stopped it. Carver didn't answer, because in the hours since Echo Team had vanished back into the earth, he couldn't shake the memory of their faces, blank, calm, unresisting, like cattle walking into a slaughterhouse they no longer feared. What if they weren't supposed to come back? Carver said finally. Reyes's brow furrowed. What? Carver stared at the dark silhouette of Monte Cassino. What if whatever brought them up made a mistake, and the monk corrected it? Reyes didn't speak for a long time. Carver, he said at last, voice quiet. We're soldiers. We deal with the living, not with this. Carver almost laughed. We're not dealing with the living, Reyes. That's the problem. Before Reyes could respond, the communications tent flap snapped open, and Sergeant Hollis stepped out, pale and sweating. Lieutenant Moore wants you both, he rasped. Now. They hurried into the tent. Inside, Moore stood hunched over the table. The map of Monte Cassino was pinned beneath a lantern, its paper quivering from the wind outside. Hendricks was beside him, face carved in granite. Moore pointed at the map. Here, this section. We found a second anomaly. Reyes stiffened. Another beacon. No, Moore said. Something else. Something bigger. Hollis turned a dial, and the room filled with a low rumble, a sound like a distant avalanche. What is that? Carver asked. Hollis swallowed. Seismic activity. Under the monastery. Deep. Regular. Not natural. Carver's skin went cold. Not natural how? Moore didn't mince words. It's breathing. The tent went dead silent. Reyes whispered, No, sir, that's not possible. But Moore cut him off. Every 31 seconds, a vibrational pattern rises through the rock, peaks and falls. It's the same frequency Carver recorded on his radio. Hendricks spoke for the first time, voice low and sharp. I want this buried, understood? No rumors, no panic, no one outside this tent hears a word. Reyes snapped. Sir, we can't just ignore that something is alive under the ridge. Hendricks slammed his palm onto the table. There is no something. There are Germans. There are tunnels. There are geological shifts. That is all. But even as he spoke, the lantern flickered violently. A new tremor rolled through the ground, but this one was different, slow, heavy, deliberate, a heartbeat. The tent poles rattled. The lantern glass shattered. Men grabbed whatever was bolted down. Outside, soldiers shouted as equipment toppled. Moore yelled, "Outside! Move!" They ran into the courtyard and froze, because the earth was rising, not exploding, not collapsing, rising, as though something beneath was pushing upward, testing the weak points, searching for a way through. Soil cracked, stones rolled aside. A fracture split across the courtyard like lightning. Reyes gasped, "It's trying to come up again!" And then Carver saw him, the monk, standing atop a pile of broken stone, hooded, silent, arms raised. Not to stop them, to stop it. As the ground heaved again, the monk stepped forward and slammed his palm onto the earth. A shockwave rippled outward, flattening the rising soil back into place. The groaning beneath the ground turned from hunger to fury. The monk staggered, nearly falling. His form flickered like a candle losing oxygen. Carver's heart lurched. "He's weakening," Carver breathed. "He can't hold it much longer." Moore grabbed him. "Carver, what are you doing?" "Look at him! He's fighting whatever's down. They're alone!" "He isn't a man!" Moore roared. Carver shook him off. "He protects the seal. He protects us." Another tremor exploded beneath the monk. The ground cracked beneath his feet. His arms shook. A shape pressed upward against the soil. Not visible yet, but the outline was unmistakable, massive, limbed, wrong. The monk faltered, and for the first time, he made a sound, a single, raw cry that was neither human nor animal but something far older, a sound of defiance and agony and duty. Carver froze, because the cry was familiar. He had heard it once before, distorted and faint, through his radio. Reyes whispered, "My God, he's not trying to keep it from escaping." Carver nodded slowly, eyes widening with horror. "He's trying to keep himself from being dragged in with it." The monk slammed his palms down again. The ground sealed. The tremors stopped. The earth fell silent. And then, the monk collapsed. His hood fell back as he hit the ground. Carver ran forward despite shouts behind him. He slid on his knees beside the figure and gently lifted the hood. For a moment he saw a face, a gaunt, sunken face of a man who must have died centuries ago, but whose eyes still flickered with awareness, just for a heartbeat. Then, the face crumbled into dust. The robes deflated, collapsing inward. Empty. Gone. Reyes whispered, "He held it back, but now he's gone. So, who's going to keep it contained?" Carver did not answer, because the ground beneath them pulsed again. A single warning, a single promise. Not done. The death of the monk, if death was even the right word, did not bring relief. It brought silence. A silence that felt wrong, like the moment before a mine detonates. Hendricks ordered the courtyard sealed. No one spoke about what they had seen. No one could, because none of them had the vocabulary for it. The monk's robes, once a solid, heavy fabric, now lay as a fine layer of ash on the cold ground. Carver tried to gather some in his hands, but it disintegrated further, slipping through his fingers like smoke. Reyes murmured, "He wasn't holding it back from us, Carver. He was holding it back from himself, from whatever kept him bound to this place." Carver didn't look away from the pile of dust. "No, he was holding both sides apart. He was the last damn wall." Moore strode over, face hard. "Enough. We're not speculating. Command will decide what's next." But even he sounded shaken. Hendricks arrived moments later with a group of engineers and demolition experts. He looked at Carver, then at the ash on the ground and clenched his jaw. "Lieutenant Moore, we proceed with excavation, full survey. We dig down until we find whatever structural weakness is causing these phenomena." Carver stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Sir, you can't open it. The monk's gone. The seal is broken. If we dig..." Hendricks turned on him with cold fury. "This is not a theological discussion, Private. This is a battlefield, and I don't take orders from shadows in tunnels. But, sir, one more word, and I'll have you removed from duty. Moore quietly touched Carver's arm. It meant, stand down, or you'll be court-martialed. Carver held his breath, chest burning. Hendricks barked to the engineers, start clearing the debris. I want access to whatever is beneath this courtyard by morning. They set to work immediately, hauling away stones, digging with shovels and pickaxes. No explosives. The tunnels were too unstable. Carver watched helplessly as the earth was peeled back, inch by inch, layer by layer. Every shovelful was a mistake. Every rock moved was a warning ignored. The ground was cold, unnaturally cold. A thin fog rose from the exposed soil, drifting around the men's ankles. Reyes whispered, "This is wrong. The mountain doesn't want to be opened." Carver's radio crackled. He froze. A faint muffled sound bled through the static. Not a voice. A movement. Scraping. Dragging. Slow, rhythmic impact, like fingernails tapping on the inside of a coffin. Carver grabbed Moore's sleeve. "Sir, it's awake." Moore paled. Because he heard it too. Before he could speak, a deafening metallic screech ripped through the courtyard. Two engineers dropped their tools and staggered back. The ground beneath them buckled, rising in jagged angles. A lieutenant shouted, "Back! Everyone back!" Men scattered. The earth cracked open with a thunderous snap, splitting in a jagged line several meters long. Something glistened inside the fissure. Wet. Black. Not stone. Carver's mind rebelled against understanding. Reyes whispered, That's not rock." The fissure widened. A smell rolled out, rancid, chemical, ancient, like the breath of a burial vault sealed before Rome even existed. One of the engineers leaned too close. The ground beneath him gave way. He screamed as he fell into the darkness. Moore lunged forward and grabbed his arm. But it was too late. A shape moved inside the fissure. Something massive, something patient, something that had been waiting for a very long time. The engineer was pulled downward with a sickening jerk. Moore stumbled back, horror contorting his face. Hendricks shouted, "Seal it! Seal it now!" But no one could. The ground kept splitting, widening, yawning open like a mouth hungry for air. Then, from deep below, a sound rose. Not a scream. Not a growl. A chorus. Hundreds. No, thousands. Of voices layered together in an impossible harmony. Crying, begging, calling. Reyes clamped his hands over his ears. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Carver staggered back, choking on fear. Because he recognized one of the voices. Echo Team, all seven. Whispering in unison, "Back, down, back, down." Moore shouted, "Fall back, fall back." But Carver did not move, because across the courtyard, atop a broken wall illuminated by moonlight, stood a familiar silhouette. The monk, back from dust, reformed. Except his hood was down. His face was wrong. Not monstrous, but incomplete, like a sculpture that had forgotten its final shape. His eyes, if they were eyes, burned faintly with a hollow, pale light. He looked at Carver, and spoke with a voice layered in centuries of sorrow. "You have undone the seal." Carver's knees nearly buckled. "We didn't, sir. We didn't mean—" The monk raised his hand. The voices from the fissure screamed. The ground trembled violently. Engineers fled in terror. Hendricks shouted for retreat. Moore grabbed Carver's arm. "Move!" But the monk pointed toward the widening abyss. "It rises." Carver stared at him helplessly. "What rises?" The monk's hollow gaze hardened. The ground beneath them shook with a violent, bone-deep roar. From the fissure, something enormous began to climb. The monk whispered, "The thing your war has woken." The fissure widened with a sound like a cathedral collapsing underwater. Stone groaned. Soil burst upward in jagged, convulsing strips. Men scrambled away from the courtyard as the ground convulsed like the hide of an animal, ridding itself of parasites. And through the rising dust, through the pale moonlight, Carver finally saw movement inside the widening maw. Not a hand, not a claw. Something far worse. A limb shaped like a human arm, but elongated, boneless, bending in ways that defied anatomy. Its surface glistened with wet black membrane, like something grown in darkness, not born. The fingers, if they were fingers, were too many, jointed like segments of an insect. The limb reached upward, planting itself against the inner wall of the fissure. The stone hissed, as though burned by contact. Reyes screamed, "Sir, what is that?" Moore shoved him back. "Retreat! Get to the upper wall! Now!" Men bolted in every direction, tripping, slipping, scrambling through rubble. Shouts turned to screams as several soldiers were pulled downward when the ground buckled beneath their boots. Carver didn't move. He couldn't. Because more limbs were rising, slender, trembling, questing, like roots struggling toward sunlight after centuries buried in sand. They weren't attacking. They were searching. For space. For air. For freedom. The monk moved to the edge of the chasm, standing between the creature and the soldiers. He raised both hands, not to fight, but to push, as though he were trying to hold down the lid of a coffin that refused to stay shut. His voice thundered, layered with impossible echoes. "Return!" The fissure erupted upward in defiance, knocking him back. Carver shouted, "No!" The monk slammed into a broken column, his form flickering like a shadow caught between worlds. Still, he pushed himself up again. Hendricks arrived with a squad of infantry, rifles raised. "Open fire!" Moore spun around. "No! You'll make it worse!" But Hendricks was already shouting, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Rifle shots cracked through the night. Bullets tore into the limbs. The limbs did not recoil, but the mountain did. The ground shook so violently that the remaining walls of Monte Cassino collapsed in roaring avalanches. The courtyard split further open. The limb closest to Carver twisted toward the gunfire, not in pain, not in anger. In curiosity, it rose higher, sliding free of the earth like a serpent from a tomb. The moonlight reflected along its surface, revealing faint impressions beneath the skin. Impressions shaped like faces. Thousands of them, layered, pressed outward as if they wanted to scream. Carver staggered back. "Those aren't growths. They're people." Reyes clamped a hand over his mouth. "Dear God," Moore whispered. "Echo Team wasn't the only thing down there." The monk staggered upright again, his form blurred with dust and light. He raised his arm toward the fissure, and a deep, ancient glow spread across the ground beneath him. Not light, not flame. A seal. A binding sigil older than Latin, older than Rome. The limbs recoiled at the glow. The fissure shrank a few inches, and the monk gasped, as though a part of him were torn away with every inch he forced the seal closed. "Carver," Reyes breathed. "He's dying." "He's been dying for centuries," Carver whispered. The monk looked directly at them. His voice broke into their skulls rather than their ears. "Leave this place, then—" Another limb slammed upward from the fissure and impaled the ground beside him. The monk screamed for the first time, a raw, hollow wail that rattled windows across the mountain ridge. The seal flickered, failed. The fissure exploded outward. Stone shot into the air like shrapnel. One of the engineers was struck in the chest and thrown like a rag doll. Moore dragged Reyes behind a collapsed wall. Carver dove for cover as dust turned the world gray. And then a shadow rose, huge, massive, not fully formed, but rising. A torso, not human, not beast, something in between. A shape made of suffering, memory and hunger. Carver felt his mind recoil, trying to reject the image, trying to pretend it wasn't real. But the weight of it, the psychic pressure pouring off it, made denial impossible. It was aware, and it was starving. The monk dragged himself upright, barely a silhouette now, flickering like failing film. He lifted both hands in one last act of defiance. "Back," the creature answered. Not with a voice, with a shockwave, a psychic blow that sent every man in the courtyard collapsing to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming without sound. Carver's vision blurred. He tasted blood. His ears rang. The monk's body shattered into ash midair. Gone. Truly gone. No resurrection this time, no return. Moore staggered to his feet. "Carver! Reyes! Move!" Carver forced himself up, choking, on dust. Reyes grabbed his sleeve. "What do we do?" Reyes cried. Carver stared into the widening abyss as more of the creature clawed its way upward. He whispered, "Run!" And behind them, the mountain exhaled. But this time, it didn't breathe out, it roared. The roar that rose from the fissure did not belong to any creature that walked, breathed, or bled. It shook Monte Cassino from its broken foundations to its ancient bedrock, tore loose stones from surviving walls, sent every man still standing collapsing to their knees. It wasn't sound. It was pressure, a tidal force of pure will, old, starving, furious. Carver felt it behind his eyes, inside his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. It pushed, it crushed, it summoned. The creature was not climbing out of the ground. The ground was climbing away from the creature. A massive silhouette heaved upward, an impossible torso, made of coiled tendons and decayed matter. 1,000 faces pressing beneath translucent skin, mouths frozen in silent screams. Reyes sobbed beside Carver. "It's made of them! All of them! Every person who ever died down there!" Carver grabbed him and dragged him backward. "Move!" The courtyard shook violently, the fissure widening like the jaws of a beast swallowing the mountain whole. Limbs, dozens now, clawed upward, bending in ways no bone could survive. They struck the collapsed walls, the shattered cloister, the bare earth, leaving black scorch marks each time. Moore shouted through the chaos, "Fire everything you have! Now!" Soldiers opened fire. Rifles cracked. Machine guns roared. Tracer rounds streaked like falling stars. Bullets hit the creature's limbs, but instead of bleeding, they sank into the dark flesh and dissolved with a wet hiss. The creature didn't recoil, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge pain. Because there was none. There was only hunger. Hendricks stumbled forward, face white with terror, voice cracking. "Call artillery! Call the tanks! Hit the mountain! Hit it all!" Moore grabbed him by the vest. "Sir, if we fire artillery on our position, we die?" Hendricks shoved him off. "We're dead anyway." He wasn't wrong. Another limb smashed upward, striking what remained of a wall and sending it crashing down like a wave of stone. 2 men were caught beneath it, their screams cut short. Carver didn't look, couldn't. He was staring at the place where the monk had last stood, empty. No more seals, no more binding, no more warnings. Monte Cassino had lost its warden. And now, the mountain wanted to be free. A radio operator crawled toward Moore, bleeding from the ears. Sir, artillery command wants coordinates. Do we confirm strike?" Moore hesitated for half a second. Then he saw the creature's main body rising, towering, blotting out the moon. "Confirm," Moore roared. "Drop everything you have." The operator screamed into the radio. Carver pulled. Reyes behind a fractured wall. Moore leapt after them. "Take cover!" Hendricks screamed at everyone still standing. "Down! Get down!" The creature reached for the sky, its limbs stretching outward as if recognizing, finally, what it had been denied for centuries: space, air, freedom. A deep, resonant groan rolled through the mountain, something ancient and triumphant, like the first breath of a god that had slept too long. Then, a whistle, distant at first. Then louder. Incoming artillery. Carver pressed his face into the dirt. "Hold!" The first shell hit the ridge above them, detonating with such force that the ground leapt and the air turned to fire. Stone rained from the heavens. The shock waves slammed Carver against Reyes, knocking the breath from his lungs. A second shell followed, then a third, then a barrage. The entire mountaintop became a storm of fire and steel. The creature writhed, not in pain, but in frustration, as the explosions hammered its rising form. Black ichor splattered in thick arcs, hissing where it touched stone. Reyes coughed blood. "It's not dying," Carver shouted over the roar. "It doesn't have to die. We just have to bury it." The fourth shell hit directly beside the fissure, collapsing half the opening. The creature's massive torso sank several feet, its limbs flailing. The courtyard shook with a groan that split the night. Moore yelled, "Keep firing! Don't let it out!" The fifth shell landed, the sixth. Then, a deafening crack tore through the ridge, the unmistakable sound of bedrock breaking. The mountain gave way. A section of earth, the size of a cathedral, collapsed downward, pulling the creature with it. Limbs scraped against stone, tearing deep gouges into the earth as it fell. The fissure widened one last time, then caved in completely. The creature disappeared into the chasm. The debris followed, tons of rock and centuries of ruin pouring down in an avalanche that swallowed everything. Silence. Then, a final roar from the depths. Not defeated, not weakened, just buried. Again. The mountain rolled shut, sealing the creature beneath layers of ancient stone. Ash drifted through the air like snow. Moore was the first to move. He staggered to his feet, face gray with dust. "Sound off," he rasped. Reyes groaned beside Carver. "Alive!" Carver coughed, trying to steady his breathing. "I think so." Hendricks limped toward them, holding his bleeding arm. "Is it over? Tell me it's over." But the question died on his tongue, because Carver was staring at the ground where the creature had vanished. Staring at a point where the soil still pulsed. Barely. Faintly. Like a heartbeat. Reyes whispered, No, it's not dead." The ground pulsed again, softer this time. A warning, a promise, a memory. Carver felt the monk's voice echo in his skull. "You have undone the seal." Moore closed his eyes. "Cover the courtyard," he said hoarsely. "Concrete. Steel. Everything. No one digs here ever again." Hendricks swallowed hard. "I'll classify the entire site. Nobody outside command will ever know what happened." Reyes nodded slowly. "War will move on." Carver looked at the trembling earth. "But it won't." The ground pulsed one final time. Done, for now. Then fell still. The night returned. The wind blew. But Monte Cassino was no longer just a battlefield. It was a prison, and its prisoner was awake. 1974, Monte Cassino, Italy. The war was long over. The monastery had been rebuilt, pristine white walls rising from the mountain like a rebirth carved out of tragedy. Pilgrims visited, students toured, the world moved on. But the ground never truly forgot. Dr. Alessandro Vitale, lead archaeologist for the Reconstruction Survey, crouched near the north wall of the new abbey. His team had spent weeks mapping beneath the structure, comparing old Roman records with medieval writings, then with Allied documents that had been heavily redacted. He brushed dirt from a carved stone fragment. Latin letters emerged, non transire, do not cross. Vitale frowned. "Marco," he called, "bring the blueprint. This symbol wasn't on the 6th century reconstruction plan." Marco jogged over with a rolled sheet. "Old Benedictine records show sealed passages, but not this far north." Vitale's brow tightened. "Strange place for a boundary marker." He knelt again, tracing the outline of the symbol. The stone was warm. Too warm. A faint vibration tickled his fingertips, subtle like the purr of a distant engine. Marco laughed nervously. You feel that? Probably machinery from the generator. But the generator was off. They both knew it. A sudden gust of cold wind swept across the courtyard, though the day was still and bright. Dust spiraled upward in a small vortex. Vitale stood quickly. We're sealing this trench now, Marco blinked. But we haven't even... Vitale's voice sharpened. Now, Marco. Something in his tone silenced argument. They gathered their tools, preparing to climb out of the trench. Then Marco froze. Alex, Vitale turned. At the far edge of the trench stood a man in a dark robe, hooded, motionless, impossible. Monks didn't wear habits like that anymore. Not here. Not since the reconstruction. The figure did not move. He didn't seem to breathe. He simply stood at the rim of the trench, staring down into the earth the archaeologists had disturbed. Vitale felt his heart crawl up his throat. Sir, the Abbey grounds aren't open today. You need to... The wind rose suddenly, cutting him off. The figure lifted one arm, slowly, palm outward. Stop, Marco whispered. What is he doing? The robed figure lowered his head as if in sorrow. His hand trembled, as though whatever held him together was fading. Vitale swallowed. Marco, climb up, now. They scrambled out of the trench. As soon as their boots hit solid ground, the wind died instantly, like a switch flipped. Vitale dared a glance back toward the robed man. He was gone. No footsteps, no dust disturbed, no shadow where he'd stood. Just air. Empty. Marco exhaled shakily. Alex. Who was that? Vitale didn't answer. He couldn't, because he'd seen something the moment the hood had shifted in the wind. Just a sliver. Just a glimpse. A face. Or what had once been a face. Sunken. Gray. Flickering like smoke. Not alive. Not dead. A warden. 1974. Later that evening, Vitale sat alone in his office, reviewing the day's findings. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He opened the Allied file on Monte Cassino, the heavily classified one he was never meant to have. Inside was a single page stamped top secret. Most of it was blacked out. But one line wasn't. No further excavation of Courtyard 2B. Seal all subterranean access. Subject, hostile structural anomaly. Another handwritten note followed in red pencil. The warden is necessary. Do not disturb the tunnels. Vitale stared at the words until his eyes burned. Then, a vibration. The lights flickered. Vitale's pen rolled off the table. From deep beneath the floorboards came a long, low groan, faint, distant but unmistakable, like something shifting in its sleep, or waking. Vitale closed the file slowly, hands trembling. He whispered to the empty room. God help us. It's still down there. The vibration stopped. Silence. Then, outside his window, on the far wall of the courtyard, a hooded silhouette flickered for one impossible second. Watching. Guarding. Warning. Then vanished. Final note. Unclassified. 2025. A fragment of the 1944 Allied intelligence report was found in declassified archives. The entity beneath Monte Cassino cannot be killed, only contained. The monk is not a ghost. He is a function, a binding. Should the seal break again, no artillery will suffice. Another line follows. Originally redacted, now revealed. If war returns to the mountain, the thing below will hear it and rise toward the noise.